Hi everyone, this is Alan from OC Nerf. Today we've got another modification video, but we're going to be taking a look at some flywheel electric powered blasters, and this one happens to be the Nerf N-Strike Barricade RV-10. If you're anywhere close to being familiar with Nerf at this point, you will know that the N-Strike comes from the N-Strike series, and the RV is the identifier for revolver or some kind of revolving ammo system. So CS would be clip system, RV is this revolving system. And so what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to take this mediocre blaster from the past and we're going to get it to compete. It is the predecessor to the well-beloved, and for good reason, Strife. So this is a blue version N-Strike Elite Strife. This is the successor to this model, and so we're going to take a look at its predecessor and we're going to see if we can't get it to play up to that game. So before we go ahead and do that, I'm going to do a quick little firing demonstration. Now this has just regular old AA batteries, 3 of them, and it fired old school Whistler darts. So I've got a couple of Whistler darts here and a Tagger dart, which is a little bit different in its size, but it's close enough and it does fire out of here really well. What it does not do very well is fire out Elites. That being the gap in the flywheel is more meant for the Whistler dart tips rather than the new Elite or even the Streamline version darts. As you can see here, this is a larger head than the Streamline or Elite darts. So we're going to go ahead and put these into the blaster. Load it up. And one more. There we go. And the way to fire the barricade was it had a safety / rev switch. So right now you can't pull back the trigger, nothing will happen because this safety is in its off position. We're going to go ahead and pull it back and it'll turn on and turn on the flywheels at the same time. Now we can pull the trigger and here we go. Not much of a thud, but you know, it's okay. Let's take okay and make it better. For comparison, I've got a Strife. This is an overhauled Strife in my version of overhauls, so it's going to be running a little bit harder, but just in comparison. So clearly outperforming this stock older blaster, but we're going to go ahead and take care of that today. So let's go ahead and go over the tools that you're going to need. So obviously you're going to need some kind of screwdriver to open up the blaster. The other thing you're going to need for a wiring modification is a soldering iron. In this case I am using my trusty ECG soldering iron here. The other thing that you're going to need is solder, and this is an old batch of solder that I got from my very first and very old soldering gun, a ginormous monster, probably larger than this. And we've got black wire and we've got red wire. This is 18 AWG, so it'll suffice for our purposes. I'm planning on putting a couple of IMRs in here and a dummy. So this is going to hold 3, so we're going to go ahead and run it with that. And we've got some just standard heat shrink here. We will also need, you don't have to, but I prefer it, a couple of helping hands, and these will help hold the wires and various things together that we will need, and I will be able to solder with both hands, so that way I can get a nice, good, clean finish on everything. The other thing you're going to need are wire strippers, so that we can go ahead and get the wire leads done correctly. And for the heat shrink, you're also going to need a lighter or some kind of heat source. You can also use your soldering iron if you so choose, or a heat gun or something to heat the heat shrink to get it to tighten up around the wire. And I have a couple of addition things that you may not need. I've got just a magnetic plate for holding on to screws and such. I've got, in case I'm going to need it, which I think I will, a set of hobby knives, and just my regular old knives that I'm going to use for pretty much anything. And I'm also going to give this a shot. I'm going to see if I can put worker flywheels in a barricade and see if that'll work, because as I mentioned before, the current flywheels in here are a little bit wider than they need to be for elite darts, and I kind of want to convert this to shoot elite darts. So we're going to go ahead and do all of those things. So step one, we're going to take the screws out of here and we're going to pop it. Okay, so we've got everything taken apart. Some screws are longer, some screws are shorter. You can figure that out when you put it back together by taking a look at how deep it goes and how pretty much just how deep the screw wells go. There was one thing that I forgot, which is there is a hidden screw underneath the battery tray here, so be sure to take out your battery cover and the batteries inside so you can get at that last final screw inside of the battery tray. That being said, we can now open up this blaster. To note, because most of the time, like with a strife, all of your pieces are on one side of the shell and the other side of the shell is nice and clean. You can just fillet it open and that's it. You just work off one half of that shell. However, in the Barricade, as well as a couple of some of the other blasters like the Demolisher, the battery is on the opposite side of where everything else is, so there is going to be a connecting wire in between them. So when we take this apart, you'll note that here it is. We've got the pieces all connected together. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this in the camera so you can kind of see it. So here's our battery tray with our trigger lock, and there's the wires that are connecting them together. Here are pretty much all the mechanisms inside the receiver here, so the pusher, the rotating drum, the jam door, and then finally we get all the way to the front where we have the housing for the flywheels, which is going to be a little bit of a pain to take apart as a piece of it is solvent welded together. Now, I've taken apart Barricades before, so I'm pretty familiar with it, but just in case you haven't, I thought this would be really good for you to take a look at. So if you're going to do this yourself, take a look at this video, maybe pause it here so that you can get a good idea of what everything looks like inside before we rip out its guts. Now, if all you're going to do is just a quick power upgrade, and that means just putting in better batteries, you don't necessarily have to do a full rewire. All you're going to need to do is pull out the thermistor right here and bypass that by resoldering it back directly into the negative end of the battery tray. The next thing that you could do after that is then pop this open, which is the housing to the motors, and rewire the motors together, which I'll show you because we're going to do a full rewire, and remove the inductors on the motors so that you can put in higher battery power and it'll run through the system, albeit on really small wires through switches and things, but it'll work. It'll definitely sound like a beast, but for the purposes of this mod guide, we're going to do everything. So let's start by taking out some of the mechanical pieces. That's what I like to do anyway. I don't want to lose this, so I'm going to take out the accessory tooth. And what we're going to go ahead and do next is focus on the receiver here and take out all of the trigger mechanisms here. Okay, so we've pretty much gutted out the mechanical pieces. I've left in the wiring so that we can talk about it before we rip it out. So what we are left with here is the battery tray with the leads all still in that go to this switch over here, which takes care of the safety and the rev up trigger. So this is in essence what is the rev up trigger for the Strife, and it passes through this channel here, goes all the way out through to the jam door switch up here, which controls to see if the jam door is open, then it will not allow power to go through to the motors, and then if it's closed, everything will work just fine, which leads all the way back through to the thermistor and then back into the battery. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and cut this right now so we can separate out the motor cage from everything else, and put that aside and kind of focus on this for a little bit and kind of clean up the system. So the thing to note is you kind of just want to pull things out like this, and there are channels in place, and you just kind of weave things through. And we're not going to be putting this back in, so we're just going to leave that as is. When you're cutting the switches free, if you're going to end up reusing them, or just in general, you want to cut the wire, not the leads. And we can then just pull this out through its channel, and now we got half of the shell completely free. And we're going to do the same thing here. Again, we're going to snip here to kind of get, actually, nope, these aren't snips, these are just directly soldered in. So let's go ahead and cut the wire right here. See if we can't pull it out this way. It's a little bit tight. There we go. So, left a little piece in there. It's like the wire got pinched underneath that. So now we've got all that, and we just have the leads left to take care of. This is where you would take your soldering iron, and do not snip out leads. You want to desolder them so that you get a nice and clean. I can't see very well. This lighting is a bit strange. Let's try from this angle. There we go. So you got a nice clean cut, nice clean break. Desoldering it. Now we have a nice battery tray there. In case you need to remember what's what, this was the positive, this was the negative. You could take, if you wanted to, you could grab yourself a pen, which say this is your positive, this is your negative. That way you'll remember for when you get there. And I'm going to go ahead and put this half of the shell aside and this half of the shell aside, and we're going to go ahead and pop open the motor cage. Okay, so I've gone ahead and unscrewed that because you don't need to see me unscrewing more screws, and there's basically 2 screws here and 4 screws here. Those aren't the tricks. The tricky part is you're going to need to break the seal here. So I went ahead and took a knife, cut that down into there. There's also a peg that's solvent welded in there. I kind of just tweezer it and pop it until it comes off. And yes, you do break it. I'm sure you don't have to if you can figure out another way, but it's easy enough to break once you get to that point, and then it just kind of falls off. This piece goes there, and we're just left with, there we go. Now we're just left with the flywheel motors and the flywheels themselves. These are the inductors. We're going to go ahead and desolder this as we did before and pull out the wires. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so I've gone ahead and desoldered the wires off of the motors. And if you take a look here, and this is the reason why I want to change out these flywheels. This fits really nicely into it. It's got nice little squeeze, which is necessary to give that pop that it needs to go through. This does not. This kind of just slips right on in there. Nothing. So we're going to go ahead and pull off these flywheels, and I'm going to need some pliers for that. Grip the ends here, and I'm going to pull these off. There we go. And these motors are actually really nice on the Barricade, so I'm going to keep those on there. They have a couple of brand new flywheels from Worker, and you can see here a comparison. These will easily compare to the Barricade to be wider, clearly wider than the Barricade motors. So we're going to go ahead and pop these back on here. There we go. And one more. Now, additionally, you can use other motors like the Strife motors, but I like to use the Worker ones. They're pretty good price, and they are very well weighted and very well balanced. The other thing I'm just noticing here, as I haven't put these flywheels before on a Barricade, is that now this is a little bit too tight, so I'm going to go ahead and need to grab my hobby knife, and I'm going to go ahead and trim that up a little bit and get back to you. Okay, so I've gone ahead and put the flywheels in and shaved down these posts right here so that the larger flywheels would fit in nicer. It was much easier to do that with the flywheels off, by the way. So I did have to take them off again to go ahead and cut and test that out. But now they are on there and they are spinning unobstructed, as you can hear. So these are ready to go. Now we're going to go ahead and connect the points here. Okay, we've gone ahead and wired this up. So I've got my positive to positive, negative to negative here, and the lead wires that are going to go out to the rest of the blaster. In case you need to see what mine looks like versus yours, this is what it is. Get it on camera here. There we go. And I've got it wrapped around here so that we can go ahead and exit this out of the small channel that we have inside of the motor cage. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now by taking this and feeding it through. There we go. Alright. There we go. Okay, so we've jumped ahead a few steps. I've gone ahead and put the motor cage back in its place. Everything is screwed into place here. There's a lot of finagling, as is the case when you go to a higher gauge wire, because the channels that were meant to go with lower gauge wire just don't quite fit anymore. So you have to do a little bit of shell work, not a whole lot, mainly just these tiny little pegs you'll find need to go. And then the channels themselves are going to work out just fine. And then just kind of squeezing it through. So right now the wires are going through there, running out their original channel here underneath, and then wrapping around out here, and then through this channel, and this is where they kind of split off. The jam door works as usual, but without the switch to kind of check here. It doesn't need to at this point, so it's just going to run a nice smooth connection. Now this is going to continue on to the other half of the blaster. This is going to go down here for a very specific purpose, because I actually don't like the fact that you have to flip a switch in order to get this to rev, or the flywheels rather, to rev up. I like on the Strife that there's a dedicated button for that, but I also like just a short trigger pull that fires up the flywheels. And in this case, this has such a long trigger pull, we do have room to pull that off. So the plan here, and I've done this a couple of different ways before, and we're going to go with the way I like best. So what I used to do before is I used to put a switch right here so that when this runs it over, it engages the flywheels and everything runs smoothly. I've noticed a few issues with that given the very narrow space that this has to hit in order for this to happen. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now instead is I'm going to kind of widen this out here with some of the spare pieces and put this in its place just up against the switch here, and it's going to stay in its normally closed wiring position so that when the switch is open, then the flywheels will rev, and when it's closed, the flywheels will not rev. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So first thing we're going to need to do is kind of size things up. I think I'm going to use this little piece here to give it a nice wide base to push against. To do that, I'm going to need to kind of hot glue that into place here, just like that. You can see. I'll turn it. Oh, darn. So I'm going to put a little joint here just like this to give this a much wider connection point for this to engage. That way we have less chance of kind of misconnecting on that. And then we're going to layer out the hot glue at the bottom there and then be able to seat this exactly where we want it. So the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and cut this down a little bit and then hot glue this into place. The next thing you're going to see is I'm going to already lay down the hot glue in there at the right size and put the switch in its place ready to be wired. So we're going to go ahead and take care of that right now. Okay, everything's wired up. All the locks have been removed. Let me just go ahead and zoom in on that so you can see everything that's happened here. So here's the battery all wired up, going through to the other half of the shell, into the switch right down there if you can see it, wired up, and all running through to the motor. So the last thing that we have to do here is to go ahead and seal this all up. Okay, I've gone ahead and closed it all up, and I've taken pictures of the internals of the motors, the rotation mechanism, all the wiring that I did. So I've got all those pictures. I'm going to go ahead and put those up after this video. And I'm going to go ahead and test it. So we've got the lock mechanism still functional, so it is a functional safety at this point. The worker flywheels are in. I had to rewire the motors a little bit to kind of clean that up, but I will go ahead and do a quick test fire. So we're going to go ahead and push this live and listen to the rev up. So we just kind of do a little bit of a pull and it will go ahead and rev up. So that's how sensitive that trigger is, and it doesn't necessarily affect that. So we're going to go ahead and test fire. Here we go. Whenever we actually get to a dart, sorry. There's a couple more. There we go. There we go. Alright. Thank you for watching this modification guide. It's been a while since I've done a barricade, so this was kind of a fun little flashback to something I did a few years back. So there's definitely a few things that I need to work on with this, namely in this trigger area here. There's a little bit of a... This all works fine. The triggering system's all fine. It's just, I think I put a little bit too much hot glue around here, and it's not quite a smooth trigger pull. I can kind of feel it pulling a little bit, and I don't like that, so that would be about the only other thing that I would do there. If you like this video, go ahead and leave me a like. If you're interested in a build like this for yourself, leave me a comment and maybe we can kind of work something out. If you have other ideas for modification guides or maybe further questions about this guide, go ahead and leave me a comment in the comment section below as well. And if you want to catch me in the next video, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, everybody. Nerf on. So I've decided that the trouble that I have with mods and mod guides in general is that I can't leave things well enough alone. So I was right, there was indeed a little piece of hot glue just getting caught right here in this lip. So I went ahead and cleaned up this trigger, and everything looks good now. It's kind of pulling all the way through, and I'm not catching on anything. As you can see there, this is how it actuates and how it the rev switch, and that's it. I'm going to go ahead and close up this blaster and call it a night. Nerf on, everybody.